See if this works. Does that work? Bonjour. Uh, I apologize that I do not speak French. It's a personality fault. I know that, and but you all speak it really well, and well done. I'm really happy to be here. I was at the last French conference back, I think it was in 2007, and been just hoping there would be another one. So here you are, here I am, and I couldn't be more excited to be here. I'm going to talk about behavior in charge. And I want to say a couple of things about that before I really get into my presentation. And by the way, there will be time for questions after I've done most of the stuff I want to talk about. All children behave, right? In fact, all of us behave. You're all behaving right now. Most of you very appropriately. So it's difficult when we talk about charge behavior. Well, what are we talking about? How is that different from regular behavior? Now, I've had a lot of children, and all my children engaged in behaviors which I wish they didn't. But it's just what kids do, and so when you add charge on top of typical development, you're adding another layer of complication. So I want to be clear right at the beginning. If your child has behaviors which people are concerned about, I don't want you to feel guilt about that. This is not your fault, okay? You didn't do something to cause these behaviors. And even if the school people look at you strangely or the medical people, give you nasty looks, it's not your fault that your kid is behaving, okay? Again, everybody behaves. Our kids have something on top of what typically developing kids have, which is charge syndrome. So I have my English version right here, so I'll be looking down at this because that's French. So the title of my talk is Charge, Behavior, Phenotype, and Behavior Triangle. And that won't mean anything to you right now. That's okay. I'm going to get there. When we look at the kinds of behaviors that our kids with charge engage in, virtually any kind of negative behavior can be seen. Sometimes they're categorized as, I remember to use this, categorized as physical behaviors. That's when they're kicking, hair pulling, biting, shoving, throwing things, that kind of great stuff. There's verbal behaviors, repetitive statements, for example. I don't know if your kid does this, but it's very common in charge for lots of good reasons. But you say, we're going to the grocery store. And your kid says, are we going to the grocery store? Yes, we're going to the grocery store. A minute later, are we going to the grocery store? Yes, we're going to the grocery store. Get in the car. Are we going to the grocery store? Yes, we're going to the grocery store. This compulsive need to know what's happening. Very, very typical as one of those verbal behaviors, which is hard to deal with. The nonverbal behaviors that get agitated, they may pace, get in your space, withdraw. These things are all typical. I don't know of any kind of classic behavior that our kids don't engage in from time to time. So what are the factors that contribute to behavioral challenges? And this is just in general. This is not specific to charge. Well, you have vulnerabilities related to cognitive disability, intellectual disability. Now, I should say that in charge, what research we can do, about 50% of the kids will have intellectual disability. 50% of the kids are unlikely to. Some of our kids go to college, some go to graduate school. My son is very, very low functioning. So there's a whole range there. So I don't get much into this first cause because it just doesn't apply to all of our kids. But it's certainly true that if you have cognitive impairments, that your understanding of the world and people's behavior, other people's behavior in that world, can be difficult. And so some of the behaviors can come from that. Then you have the individual child's life experiences, you know, give their age today, going back, what are the kinds of things that have happened to them? And I'll talk about that. Then factors in the immediate environment, what's going on right now? And then there's the specific genetic cause. Is there something about that CHD7 gene mutation which leads to certain kinds of behaviors? And we're not there to know whether that's true, but I do want to talk about that's we get to the behavioral phenotype part. So let's talk about factors in the environment. Nope. Life experiences. Sorry, went too far. Don't do that. All right, life experiences. You know, even prenatally, right? They've got charge. They're starting to develop differently after 6 weeks, probably. And so, what is it about that environment prenatally that might be ultimately leading to behavioral differences? One simple thing is, amniotic fluid, which the child ingests and it comes out their nose, and you can see on an ultrasound it coming out of the nose that they do not have choanal-atresia. But if they have choanal-atresia, it won't show because it's blocked. What's the impact of that on the child's sensory experiences in the womb? I don't know. There's some research starting on that in general, and it's going to be kind of interesting to see how that develops. Neonatally, so the child's born. My kid was in the neonatal intensive care unit for a month. Some of your kids may have been there much longer than a month, and some of your kids may have not needed intensive care. But what happens to you when you're lying, the baby now, lying under those lights, shining down on them, with tubes coming out of all parts of their body and alarms going off all the time? So they're starting to, well, they've been talking for a while about developmental care in the intensive care unit, where you look at the state that the infant is in before you do a particular procedure so that we can keep them as calm as possible. And they're trying to reduce the lights. I mean, when my kid was in there, they said, get a music box and play music for him and hold his hand. And that's comforting him in the intensive care. Well, turns out he's completely deaf. So my winding that music box did nothing, and very tactilely defensive. So it was probably painful for him to have me hold his hand. I was doing the best I could, but probably just the wrong thing. So we have some things to learn about intensive care. Infancy, attachment, right? And you have a child and you want to feel that the child is really strongly attached to you. And you look for that. They look at you and they smile, follow you with their gaze, give you that kind of feedback that you're really important to them. Our kids don't always do that because, they have vision impairment. They might even notice that you're in the room because they don't hear you. And so what does that do to you when you're going in there looking for that child to look at you and give you that beautiful response? And they're not doing that. And that's upsetting for a parent. And so, what Jacob was one of those ones referred to this morning that didn't want to be held, right? We didn't know this. He's crying, and we're trying to comfort him by rocking him, squeezing him, walking around the room with him. Nothing worked. So finally, I'd had it. I put him down on the floor, and he stopped crying. That's just a weird thing. Is my child not let me comfort him? What does that do to me psychologically? So helping parents in particular to look for the cues that may be there for attachment, because the traditional ones very often are not. Um, Early childhood surgeries, right? It's very common for our kids to have 12 to 24 surgeries in those first 4 years of life. What's the impact on that? The anesthesia, the pain, discomfort, fear on the part of parents, and kids can pick up on our anxiety. So that's an issue. Research study I did, about half the mothers in the study said they did not feel uh, well attached, and the surgery was a part of that. Oh, theory of mind. It's a weird term, but theory of mind means that you recognize that other people have their own intentions, their own thoughts, their own goals, their own experiences. Because when we're little, it's all about us, right? We don't, other people are kind of utilitarian. They're tools that we use to get what we want. But when theory of mind develops, you recognize, no, that person has things they want to do, and that person has things they're thinking about. That develops really late in charge because of the lack of social interaction, particularly with peers. And then with the sensory impairments, very difficult to see what other people are experiencing. Parenting struggles. Yeah, I mean, when my first kid came home from the hospital and he was quite typically developing, I panicked. How could he come home from the hospital? I don't know how to change a diaper. I don't know how to feed him. I don't know how to keep him alive. When Jacob came home from the hospital several kids later, we were given 20 minutes on how to use a suction machine and apnea monitor and to feed him through his mouth down into his stomach. Petrified, petrified. So yeah, I struggled as a parent. Okay, school aged, and I've got lazy down there. Sometimes we've heard this from teachers. Oh, that kid is so lazy. They won't sit up properly. They don't pay attention. They've always got their head down on their desk, on their arm. We know why they put their head down their arm, down on their desk, so they can concentrate, so they can pay attention. Because otherwise, you've got what was referred to earlier as the problem of the eyes focusing on an object. Because if you turn your head, your eyes go with your head, and we can do that. Our eyes move away from our head, the head direction of our head. So when the kid is lying down with their arm, they are steady and they can pay attention better. But they get described as lazy because they do things like that. They are not lazy. Our kids are heroes in terms of their ability to get through a day without total exhaustion. Fatigue. I mean, fatigue is a basic daily experience because they have to work so hard to stay focused on the world and to keep up with other people and life, what life is asking of them. One of my doctoral students did a research study, which is not published yet, maybe one day, but on fatigue, identified a large amount of fatigue in our kids with charge. And of course, appearance, some of our kids look a little odd. I think they look terrific, but not everybody sees it that way. Peer approval may be difficult. Is this the kid that people want to avoid because they seem odd and different? And of course, our kids want to be accepted like anybody else. So factors in the environment. So I don't know how many of your kids hang upside down or hang their head over to the side, but it's very, very common in charge. This kid is watching TV. Now, nobody taught him to watch TV that way. He figured it out for himself. But this is kind of brilliant. I mean, when you holding your head up requires a lot of muscles in your neck. But if you're hanging upside down, those muscles can relax. So you've gotten rid of the muscle problem. You've also got rid of the vestibular problems. because the semicircular canals are not bothered by head movement because your head is just steady. You also have eliminated one of the problems with colobomas, because colobomas block the upper visual field. So you see our kids often look around like this because they have to look straight ahead of themselves from the lower visual field. If you're upside down, your lower visual field becomes your upper visual field, and now you can look straight at what the object is that you want to see. Also getting a lot of proprioceptive feedback through his body, so he knows where his body is in space. It's brilliant. Our kids have figured this out. So many of them do it. But what happens in school? You can't lie like that. You have to sit up and pay attention. This is the best way they can pay attention some of the time. So we have to be very sensitive to that. I had a parent who contacted me and said, my child's behavior has gotten really, really bad. I don't remember now all the details of what she was doing, but it was bad. But it's been this way for like about 3 months. And so thinking of factors in the immediate environment, I said, what happened 3 months ago? Oh, nothing. We went on vacation. And I said, how does she enjoy vacation? It was hell for her. All right, now we think we have an idea as to what is behind this behavior. It's rare for a kid to very suddenly develop really unusual, challenging behavior. All of a sudden, over time you can see some changes, but something happened. Something was going on in that child's environment, and it's really important to know what that is. And then we've got what services are available for your kid. That's the immediate environment. How much family support is there? Are there people out there you can count on, not just for your kid, but for your family? And then bullying, unfortunately, we've documented that with kids with CHARGE, you get bullied at school. That's a factor. If they feel like their friends are attacking them or being rude to them or whatever, that can lead to some behaviors. So this gets a little technical, but I'm going to try and make it as simple as possible. We used to study behavior by degree of cognitive impairment or intellectual disability, whichever term you want to use. As I said back in one of the early slides, we've moved away from that to look at what behaviors are typical of children with a particular syndrome. And this actually started in England, where the physicians were noticing parent groups, parents of a particular syndrome were identifying similar kinds of behaviors in their kid. And that's what they began to talk about as a behavioral phenotype. So in other words, is there a certain kind of behavior which is typical of people with a certain kind of genetic syndrome? Turn my page. There it is. So this definition, I mean, it's a simple, I think it's a relatively simple definition: a pattern of behavior that's reliably identified in groups of children with known genetic disorders and is not learned. You can think of the line hanging upside down as a behavior which is not learned and is typical in CHARGE. It's not so typical of other syndromes. So in that sense, it's a part of a behavioral phenotype. Here's some examples which may or may not be extremely interesting, but Fragile X, a genetic syndrome, they have problems with executive dysfunction, which is how you manage your attention, how you shift your attention from one activity to another, those kinds of executive tasks. They have self-injurious behavior of biting the back of their hands or fingers, shyness, and they avoid direct gaze at somebody. So those behaviors are very typical of Fragile X. We got Cornelia de Lange, self-injurious behaviors, problems with self-restraint, compulsive behaviors, they just can't stop doing them, and selective mutism, they just may not be willing to talk at times. Crew to shot, sleep problems, um, attachment to specific objects. Again, self-injurious behavior, especially head banging, aggressive behavior, and hyperactivity. And then Prader-Willi, which is really well known because of their need to gorge food. If they see an edible object someplace, they will go and eat it, and they won't stop eating until there's no more food left. They can move on to inedible objects as well. So, some sawdust or something that they might ingest also. They often die from complications of obesity. You can't stop them from eating other than locking all the food away. I'm going to break in here to talk about the autism question. That's my son. He's using finger paints. Not the usual way you use finger paints, though, right? Because he'd rather paint himself than piece of paper. So that's weird. Must be autistic, right? I've spent years and years and years, really, because I've gotten so old, telling people our kids do not have autism. Now, if it helps you in some way to get your kid diagnosed with autism because you get extra money or services or something, okay, but they don't have autism. There are a lot of candidate genes for autism. Um, I heard there were 28. I recently saw there were 60, but genes that may lead to autism. But that just suggests we really don't know the cause because we don't, and actually the diagnosis of autism is by checklists. So you check. Do they show this behavior? Check. This behavior? Check. This behavior? Check. You got too many checklists, too many checks, and you have autism. There's no blood test for it, right? So deficits in social communication and social interaction. Do our kids have problems with social interaction and social engagement? Yes. Check. Why do our kids have problems with those things? Because they're sensory impaired. How did you learn appropriate social skills? And so far, everybody here seems to be showing them. Well done. But really, how did you learn to do that? By observing other people, right? Incidentally, you happen to be somewhere and someone did something positive or negative, and you thought, I like that. Our kids don't learn incidentally. They don't take it all in. You have to bring everything you want them to learn right to them. So how am I going to learn to be socially adept? It's really difficult. On the other hand, I find that so many children with charge are so interested in social interaction. I mean, so many of them will just, when they're little, just climb on my lap. That's not autistic-like behavior, people. That's very different. Now, my own son, he doesn't engage very much socially, but again, he's non-vocal. He doesn't speak. He knows a few signs. He communicates by pictures and gestures. So that's a real disadvantage for him in understanding social interaction. Then they also, another set of checks is restricted repetitive patterns of behavior. So they do the same thing over and over again. One thing that would really get them the autism diagnosis is light flicking. Of course, Jacob not only likes light flicking, but he likes anything with spinning lights, vibrating toys, anything to get that stimulation into his brain. So he's engaging in repetitive behaviors partly because they work for him in terms of stimulating his brain, but they also are something he knows how to do. And knowing I can do something is really beneficial. Repetitive movements, insistence on sameness. Oh my goodness, why do our kids insist on things being the same? Our laundry machines are in our our lowest level. We have tri-level down in the basement. I was carrying a load of laundry down there, and suddenly I fell over a table. The table was not supposed to be there. It had never been there before. Somebody moved that table. Now, I probably should have turned on the lights and that kind of stuff, but I knew where I was going, so I just tripped. If you have sensory impairments, it's very helpful if things stay the same, so you know where things are. You know, you have the comfort of recognizing that I'm not going to hurt myself because if I walk through there, I know I'm not going to bump into something. Fixated interests, fixations. I knew a girl who was boy bands. She'd come home from school and get on her computer and the internet and look at boy bands and listen to the boy bands music. She was obsessed by this. Well, it occurred to me that I'm obsessed by stuff too. I just don't let people know how obsessed I am. But if you have something that you're interested in, why wouldn't you want to spend lots of time on it? But because she has a syndrome, we have to look at that as wrong, bad, autistic-like. And then unusual interest in sensory aspects of the environment. Well, of course, our kids are interested in sensory aspects of the environment. Any sensory experience that they can get, they want, unless it's too much, and then they have to withdraw from it. And that happens, right? They start out liking some sensory experience, and then suddenly it's too much for them. They can't handle it, and they withdraw. So autism is so different. I could tell you that my graduate students who have worked with autism and worked with charge both, they're nothing alike. But we've got a very broad definition of autism today that encompasses, well, probably half of us here, right? How many of you think you're autistic? No, I'm not going to. But really, it's such a broad diagnosis that. Remember the German conference a few years ago? Father said, "Well, my son's being tested for autism next week." I said, "Well, he'll pass." He says, "I know he'll pass. I know he doesn't have autism, but we'll get extra services or something for having the diagnosis." And all right, go for it. So back to behavioral phenotypes, but I thought it was important to get the autism thing in there. One day I sat down at my computer and I did my first draft of my charge syndrome behavioral phenotype. It's the only draft I have. I've had it for years and years. My students keep wanting to try to change it, but they haven't so far. So I got low normal cognitive functioning because a lot of behavioral phenotypes start out with cognitive functioning. And I say low normal because that's the average we seem to find in charge, but it's not below normal, right? So we have reason to expect our kids may do okay in school, which I think is really important for teachers to say, to look at, if they ever look at this and say, oh, so this kid should be able to succeed in school, basically. But also recognizing for most of our kids is not high cognitive functioning, although again, there are those that go on to university and professional lives. So it's very difficult to generalize. Very goal-directed, persistent, and have a sense of humor. Your kids have a sense of humor. I mean, they'll really crack you up. They make me laugh. They're so funny. They just have perspective on life and the world, which is just really, really great. But the important thing here is the goal-directedness. When your kid wants to do something or doesn't want to do something, how does it go if you try to stop them? Probably not terribly well, because once our kids have an idea in their mind, they'll find a way to accomplish it. And in fact, there was a study years ago on obsessive compulsive disorder related to trying to stop kids from doing a behavior. And they found that if they tried to stop the behavior, the kids' compulsions and obsessions just were very, very hard to control. But on the positive side, why do you think our kids get up and walk? They shouldn't be able to, right? With vestibular disaster that they have, they should not be able to walk. Walking requires good vestibular sense. It requires good vision. It requires good muscles. But our kids are going to do it. You can't stop them, really. I mean, my kid was 7 when he walked, so later. The average age tends to be right around turning 3 years old for charge. But I've known kids as late as 12 who finally got up and walked. Um, I haven't met anybody who hasn't walked. Sometimes they prefer. I know some adults who prefer not to walk, but they can walk. I've seen them do it. So I think that goal directedness is actually a positive feature in many respects, although it can be very annoying as a parent. Repetitive behaviors. Oh, I'm sorry. Socially interested but immature. That's the thing. Like they'll come up to you and they'll say, "Hi, what's your name?" And say her name's. Hi, I'm Tim. Hi. Are you having a good time? Where are you from? What's the color of your house? What's the color of your car? Okay, they're trying, right? Give them credit for trying to figure out how this works. Um, so I don't think this is bad, but I think it gets misread as something difficult and challenging when it just isn't. It's just they don't have the social skills yet, but they want to. They want to get along with other people. Okay, repetitive behaviors. We talked about that a little bit, like the eye flicking or doing something over and over and over again. But I notice that those tend to increase when the kid is stressed. So it's a nice thing if you see your kid increasingly doing a repetitive behavior, it may be a good sign for you that the kid is stressed. Um, high levels of sensation seeking. Well, of course, they have high levels of sensation seeking. Their brain needs as much input as it can get. Under conditions of stress and sensory overload, find it difficult to self-regulate and easily lose behavioral control. So stress again is a major idea there, but also the sensory overload. My kid, I used to take him for walks all the time, and there was a bush he really liked to touch and feel this bush. But then I noticed that he might feel it for a bit, then suddenly his head's down in the bush and he's pulling on his face and he's wailing a bit. What was a pleasant sensory experience suddenly got out of control, and it overwhelmed him. It was more than he could handle. So that's the idea here. It'd be very difficult to keep oneself in control or to self-regulate when there's sensory overload. And then finally, difficulty with shifting attention, transitioning to new activities, seem to be kind of lost in their own thoughts. This is not a perfect behavioral phenotype, okay? It's more of a description of the behaviors and how the behaviors may manifest themselves, I guess. I don't like how I said that, but it's an attempt to kind of capture the behaviors of charge. But things evolve over time. Somebody will do a better job someday. So some points to keep in mind here. So these behavioral descriptions that I've given you have an increased probability of occurring, but doesn't mean they're going to in every case. Your kid may have very nice behavior, and many kids with charge do, especially the older they get, which is like other children too, right? So while I find this is a commonality among kids with charge, it doesn't mean it applies to every particular person. And the environmental factors can still modify the behavior. So, you know, given the environment in which you're in school or at home or in neighborhood or even just in your room, factors in that environment can modify the behaviors, even if it's a part of a phenotype. And the extent of intellectual disability can have an impact. But even if it's genetically based, it can still have a social function. This is kind of important. It's like behavior is communication, right? And so it doesn't mean that every behavior my child engages in is deliberately communicating to me, but I can read that behavior to get information from what's going on with him. So learning what are my child's typical behaviors when they're in pain? What are my child's typical behaviors when they're happy and doing well? I mean, those things that we learn them with our regular kids. We just don't recognize how significant they are. But with charges, it's really, really important to be able to figure that out. So even if any of those behaviors are related to the genetics, it doesn't matter. It can still tell you what's going on with them at a given moment. Also, with our kids having some of our kids have limited communication, the same behavior or sign or picture can have multiple meanings. And so you don't always know. I'll just give you a silly example. We have a picture for pudding because Jacob loves chocolate pudding. He would eat chocolate pudding all day long if we had it available. Um, but we realized one day that he also uses it when he wants to go to the toilet and have a bowel movement. Also brown, right? And so, Jacob, those are two very different things, guy. So now then we learned we had to find out which is it that you want. Now today he'll just go to the refrigerator and get it, or go to the bathroom and take care of himself. But back then it was kind of complicated. But that's a nice illustration of how the same behavior can serve multiple communications. So that covers the last point too, is that behavior that's genetically based can still serve a communicative function. Communication is the most significant thing we can have with our kids, right? And when it goes well, life is much better. But it can be such a strain on us when our kid can't tell us what's going on. And that's some of my worst moments is with Jacob, just tell me what you want. Just tell me what's going on. I can't figure this out. Um, so even if any of that behavior is genetically based, still, I can read it as communication. That kid was not actually angry, but he does have charge. So it's just a few points to consider. Behavioral descriptions have an, oh, wait a minute, I did that already. So they have no control, right? French, English. Saying that behavior is part of a behavioral phenotype does not completely suggest it's out of the child's control. Certain aspects are in Prader-Willi syndrome, not eating is out of their control. But that doesn't mean in all cases it can't be dealt with. The self-injurious behaviors that we saw in so many of the different syndromes, where they're biting themselves or banging their head, there are methods out there to help control those, even if they're genetically based. Yeah, environmental factors may modify how the behaviors are expressed. So sometimes changing the environment at school or at home can impact the child's behavior to the better. Oh, jumped around, didn't I? Okay, children choose behavior because it solves the biopsychosocial problem they're experiencing. Today, everything's biopsychosocial. That's just the lingo that we use to bring everything together. But I like to think of their behavior as something they've chosen. So think about a behavior your kid engages in, which is problematic, and think about why my child would choose to do that behavior. It puts in a different framework. It gives them more agency. Like they chose something. This kid chose to hang upside down. Why would he choose to hang upside down? Right? That's weird behavior. Jacob painted his face with finger paints. Why would he choose to do that? And when you ask it that way, you begin to come up with some ideas as to why they might. And I told you about the hanging upside down. For Jacob, it's just feels good to rub this stuff on his forehead. I'm pretty sure that's what that's all about. Um, so I'm not saying they're choosing it to impress us. They're choosing it for themselves, because if they're experiencing an issue, Well, for example, some of our kids engage in feces smearing, right? They take feces out of their bottom and they rub them all over themselves and the walls, and it's pretty disgusting, but they do it. So why would they choose to do that? Now, I don't know why in every case, but it may be because they want to get rid of it. It may be because it feels interesting on their hands. It's probably not because of the smell, because they don't tend to have a sense of smell and charge. So that's probably not and it's something that gets in the way of doing it. Um, so when you begin to think like that, so we thought, well, what's similar to that? Well, you have Play-Doh and clay and slime, things that they can might feel good to rub around or even rub on their face. As a substitute, choose that, Jacob. We also figured that maybe he was having problems managing his bowel movements. So let's help him manage them. So once we got him on a much better schedule for bowel movements and had the substitute uh, objects, the behavior went away. Um, I'm not as easily as I'm making it sound, but it did go away. So we've identified in my research lab, and I'm retired now, so I don't have a research lab anymore, but we identified 3 factors that we think are really impacting the behavior in charge. And so I'll go through those 3, and I'll give you the model first. So this is my behavior triangle, and I got pain at the top, and sensory issues, and anxiety. And I have self-regulation in the middle, because learning to regulate your pain, regulate your sensory issues, and regulate your anxiety are really helpful things that to learn to do in life. And so to address these issues, we need to teach some self-regulation. So pain, why is pain so important? How do you behave when you're in pain? Look in the mirror sometime when you're in pain and say, oh my gosh, look at me. We don't always respond to pain appropriately. Um, so that's one reason why pain is kind of important behaviorally, but it can also affect normal brain and neurological development. So we don't know how much pain our infants are experiencing, but it will be impacting their neurological development. So that's another reason it's really, really important. It can affect sleep. And who's affected when the child doesn't sleep? Parents. So it affects the parents' behavior too, right? Because we don't behave at our best when we're sleep deprived. Um, it can interfere with exploration of the environment and learning, because if you're in pain, how much time do you want to spend learning new stuff? Is that the time you get a new textbook and try to learn some new material when you're in pain? Unlikely, right? So the kids tend to withdraw quite a bit when they're in pain. Can interfere with the development of attachment and trust. So I'm in a world in which I'm experiencing all this pain and no one is paying any attention to me, right? So how can I trust? Also, once tolerated, we tend to forget about it a little bit. I mean, I'm old enough now that I've got pain in different parts of my body. Nothing terrible, but most of the time I paid no attention to it. It used to be we thought that kids with cognitive impairment and syndromes like charge don't really feel pain. You know, they got a high pain threshold and it takes a lot of pain before they notice it. I think it's kind of dangerous idea, because it assumes then that we can do any kind of medical procedure to them without worrying about, their pain. Or I'm convinced it's absolutely there. They just don't know how bad it is because they don't have any comparison. They don't always know what's the appropriate response to pain. So the signs you get can be kind of different. When Jacob's in pain, he can't settle down. He goes in one room, tries to lie in a bed or to pick up a toy, for just a few seconds, and he goes to a different room and tries stuff. And then he's got a basket of different toys. He's trying one, trying another, trying the other. We've learned that inability to settle down is an indication of pain in Jacob. He also takes sharp objects and wrenches them in his neck, and that almost always means ear infection. He also would turn on water faucets and put his hand underneath, and that would cause, a big wet mess. But that was also an indication of pain. But he can't tell us. That's the problem. He can't tell us where it hurts. So I think it becomes tolerated and ignored, and therefore we don't know that they're in pain until it's crisis level. And we don't want to have to get to that point. So with challenging behavior, I say always look at pain first. Right? It may not be clear to anybody, because how often do you take your kid to the doctor and the doctor says, I don't see anything wrong. And then the next day they're really sick, because our kids tend to know before doctors do that they're really sick. It's just one of the sources of pain for kids with charge is the whole gastrointestinal system, right? Lots of gas, constipation, difficult time having a bowel movement. And that's really, really painful. And yet it's kind of those hidden things. You look at an ear looks fine. Look at the nose looks fine. Don't know what's wrong. I had a parent who just kept insisting, because she'd listened to me, no, there's some pain going on. And they finally identified the gastrointestinal issue, and that was treated, and the kid's behavior improved significantly. There's one time Jacob wouldn't go to sleep at night, and I said, obviously he's in pain. He would lie down for 10 minutes maybe and then get up again. We settle him down for 10 minutes later, he'd get up again. We finally found out, after really pursuing the matter, that he had a foreign object in his eardrum. No, it was hitting his eardrum when he lay down. It was in the ear canal. It was infected. And once we got that removed, he started sleeping again. In the meantime, of course, the doctor wanted to prescribe, before we knew what the cause was, prescribe sleep medicine. I said, I don't want him to have sleep medication. Right? There's something wrong here. And you can put him on sleep medication. How long will it take us to find out what's really wrong? Because we'll stop pursuing it once he sleeps again. But if behavior is communication, drugging the behavior away takes away a form of communication. And I'm a little behind, but hey, I started late, right? Of course, I'm a little behind. So lots of sources of pain in charge, and I'm not going to go through all this. Ear infections last forever. Jacob has one right now. He's 36. Those will always go on because of very flat eustachian tubes. It means that the stuff in the ear doesn't drain out like it should. I think it's at least one of the reasons for it. Sinus infections, migraine. We've got some research on headaches in charge. But there's lots and lots of different sources related to the medical conditions. So we should be alert at all times to the possibility that the kid's behavior is related to pain, particularly if you can correlate it with medical discoveries, so to speak. Take him to the doctor. Oh, yes, he's sick. Well, we saw these behaviors right before. Okay, that's a good indication of what behaviors are related to pain. Okay, sensory issues. I mean, we could keep adding to this list. I think we understand, other professionals don't always understand, that if you're deaf-blind, it's not additive, right? It's not just I'm deaf plus I'm blind. It's the combination multiplies the difficulty for the brain. Your brain just sits inside your skull and can't do anything without sensory input, right? It's got to know something's going on out there. And if you think, well, deafness and vision impairment multiply, then start adding the other senses to it. We have really sensory impaired kids. Now, the research first study was done here in France, wasn't it? On lack of sense of smell, because you guys all use perfumes, right? So they use different perfumes, and kids didn't react. And I think they had, I don't know how many kids they had in the first time they did it. I don't think it was a whole lot, but there's actually a very important reason why the sense of smell isn't there, and it has to do with development of the nasal buds, which also ironically leads to problems with puberty, but that's a whole nother medical presentation. So we got lack of sense of smell, that impacts taste, right? And then you have the tactile problems. It's particularly on the palms of the hands and the bottoms of the feet, but it can be other places in the body where they just don't like to be touched. If you're going to touch a kid with charge, I always say, make it a firm touch, not a light touch, because they're very defensive about touch. We've talked about this today, the vestibular problems, proprioception, that's knowing where your body is. Like if I said, tap your left big toe, you guys could all do that right away. But if you have proprioceptive problems, you might have to tap your foot to identify where that big toe is. So again, each loss just multiplies the impact. And problems with sensory processing occurs in a number of other genetic syndromes. It's not unique to charge, but what's unique to charge is how many sensory systems are impacted. It can be associated with anxiety, it can be associated with obsessive compulsive disorder. Even incidental, I'll use that word, even incidental sensory events may overload the child. It may not take much to take them from a calm state to an over-aroused state, as I said with Jacob in the bush. And of course, you need to intervene with sensory issues very carefully to avoid meltdowns. You all know a meltdown versus a temper tantrum, right? The meltdown is a sensory thing where they've lost sensory control and they can't control their behavior anymore. It's different from a temper tantrum where they're trying to get something. I watched a girl in a gym one time who had charge, and it was a very loud environment. She was working on some kind of exercise machine. People were running around the room, and you just see suddenly her facial features collapse and her body collapse, and then she was out of control behaviorally. Okay, anxiety. I just think this is a fascinating list of kinds of behaviors you can see with anxiety. And I highlighted the aggressive, restless, irritable, tantrums, defiance, because I don't think we always think of those things as coming from a very anxious person that's the one way they've been able to express their anxiety. So most any behavior could be a sign of anxiety. So why would our kids have anxiety? Anxiety is about not knowing what's going to happen. And that's kind of a basic general definition, but you think about how much we like certainty about what's going to, before we ended the morning, right? We got instructions about, where lunch is, how long lunch will take, when things are going to start up again. That reduced my anxiety because I had some kind of a handle on, what might be happening, and they've been taking really good care of me here, but you go to some meetings, you don't know what's going to happen in the evening. Are you just leaving me alone? Are we going to dinner? What? And you start getting anxious. So what will happen today? Right? And it's nice to know we have a program, so we have some hint of it. But if you're deaf, blind, or other sensory impairments, do you know what's supposed to happen that day? What do they want me to do today? What they want me to do in any given situation? We've come to this strange place and we're going into a room, but what do they want me to do here? Or where are we going? When you packed up and came, where are we going? I don't understand this. What will happen when we get there? Will I feel safe? Which is really important. for a kid with charge to feel like wherever they're going to be, they can feel safe. The world doesn't always make sense. It can be unpredictable. And this is the thing about deafblindness. And I realize not all kids with charge are deafblind, but the vast majority are impaired in vision and hearing to a certain extent. You don't necessarily really know what's happening out there in the world beyond your bubble, right, of sensory abilities. And so I might come into Jacob's room and say, stand up, come on. We go out to the car, we get into the car. Are we going 5 minutes to the grocery store? Are we going 10 hours to visit grandma? We don't know because I haven't been able to define it for him so that I can reduce the anxiety. The way we do that is through calendar systems where Jacob's got several, but one is the days of the week, the major events that are going to occur each day of the week. And then the other is he lives in the house next door to us with 24/7 care. And we're all college students working for him. But they come in for a 4-hour shift and they start by laying out what's going to happen during that shift. And Jacob can choose. But that really reduces anxiety, which in turn reduces the problems with behavior. So self-regulation. Here's a definition: the primarily voluntary regulation of cognition or thought, behavior, emotion, physiological states for the purpose of goal-directed actions. If you ever read Deafblind International, there's a whole series we did on self-regulation a few years ago, and I could make that available if you're interested in that. So, self-regulation of pain. So a lot of pain is tied up with pain anxiety and pain catastrophizing. Pain's usually worse, right, when you're trying to fall asleep at night. And that's because I know there's a 50-50 chance if I'll wake up in the morning, right? It's like, this pain, I'm dying from something, I'm sure. So we get really worried about it at that point. And then get tense and distressed and nervous and irritable. So to self-regulate, we have to learn how to change our thoughts and expectations. This is going to be fine. I'll meet with a doctor. We'll sort it out. It's not that bad. I can take pain reliever, meditation, and distraction. And what I have in the picture there is Sharon Berry Grassick, who is from Perth, Australia. She passed away, unfortunately, a number of years ago, but she developed a form of Tai Chi, which she called Fun Chi. And it's lots of movements you make are related to animals and just fun stuff for kids. And she developed it for kids who were deafblind and had charge or had charge. But it's really fun to watch the kids do this. And we're doing some research on it. And one boy had they had a DVD of it, which he could put into play to play the tape and do the movements. And he learned that when he was starting to get upset by anything, that he could go get that DVD and put it in. He'd say to his mom, I need Fun Chi right now, to help him settle down. I thought that was really cool. This is self-regulation of sensory systems, right? And these kids have learned that when their sensory systems are upset and not processing properly, they can do this and hang upside down. One mom said, yeah, my kid comes home from school. She's had a pretty good day. She'll hang for about 10 minutes. If it's a bad day, she'll hang there longer. Because their sensory systems are just you never get that irritated feeling all over your body. This settles everything. Well done, kids with charge, to figure that out. And this is self-regulation of anxiety. Now, I live a fairly regulated life, except when I'm traveling, which I would do a lot. But routine's my buddy, right? I can keep my anxiety down by engaging in routine. It works for me. It does not work for my wife. She's always saying, "Oh, we have to do things just when you want to do them because it's part of your routine." Yep, true. It's like going to the airport. I don't know how many of you need to get there really early and how many want to cut it as close as you can. I'm a get there early person. My anxiety is just too high if I think I might be late to get to the airport. My wife wants to cut it as close as she possibly can. And yes, she has missed a flight because of it, but didn't change anything. Right. And one day I left pretty early and I was in two traffic jams before I got to the airport. Got there just in time, with an hour. And I said, see, this is what works. So I think routine is really good for our kids with charge because it makes their life predictable, right? I know what's going to happen. And so I don't have to be anxious about when we're going to do something because maybe it's on the calendar system, maybe it's just part of the routine, but a predictable life is a good life for charge. When I retired, my wife said, "You want a retirement party?" I said, "No, I want a reunion of my lab members." So we had a reunion. 15 of them were able to come. Most of my doctoral students were there. The kid in the back, the man in the back, he emailed me at Central Michigan where I worked. He was a student there. He said, "I see you have a charge lab. I have charge. Could I come and be part of your lab?" And so he did, and it was really fun having him there, give us additional insights. But these are the people responsible for a lot of what I know. So, merci beaucoup, and time for questions.